A broken rancher was about to end his life when 6 desperate children appeared at his door with nothing but hope and each other. What they asked for was simple: just one night in his barn. What they gave him in return would transform a man who had nothing left to live for into someone who discovered that sometimes families aren't born, they're built by choice and courage. If you want to discover how 6 orphan children saved a dying man's soul and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell for more incredible stories of hope, healing, and the power of family. Asterisk: the October wind cut through the Colorado Territory like a knife through bone, carrying with it the promise of an early winter that would be as merciless as everything else in Marcus Sullivan's life had become. Mac sat on the front porch of his ranch house, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in one hand and his service revolver from the war in the other, watching the sun sink behind the Rocky Mountains for what he intended to be the last time. At 48, Mac had seen enough death to fill several lifetimes. The war between the states had taken his youth and his faith in humanity. The fever that swept through Colorado 3 years ago had taken his wife Catherine and their 2 children, Michael, who would have been 15 now, and little Sarah, who'd barely made it to her 7th birthday before the typhoid claimed her. The ranch that had once been his pride and joy now mocked him with its emptiness. 800 acres of some of the finest grazing land in Colorado Territory, and he could barely keep 50 head of cattle alive. The harsh winters, rustlers, and his own descent into despair had whittled down what had once been a thriving operation to a handful of buildings and memories. That cut deeper than any wound he'd taken in battle. Mac lifted the revolver, feeling its familiar weight. He'd cleaned it this morning, loaded it with a single bullet. One was all he needed. Catherine and the children were waiting for him somewhere beyond this vale of tears, and he was tired of carrying the burden of living without them. The irony wasn't lost on him that a man who'd survived Gettysburg and Antietam would meet his, and not from an enemy bullet, but from his own hand in the place he'd once thought would be his sanctuary. But there was no shame in it anymore. He'd fought the good fight, loved deeply, and lost everything that mattered. There was nothing left but the endless ache of missing them. As Mac raised the gun to his temple, a sound carried on the wind stopped him cold. Voices, children's voices, coming from the direction of the main road that led to his property. Keep up, Tommy, we're almost there. I can't carry Rose much further, Emma. She's getting heavy. Just a little more, please. We have to find somewhere safe before dark. Mac lowered the gun, squinting through the gathering dusk. 6 small figures were making their way up the dirt road that led to his ranch, moving slowly and staying close together like a pack of young animals seeking shelter. His first instinct was to fire a warning shot, to scare them off before they could complicate what was supposed to be a simple ending to a life that had become unbearable. But something in their voices, the exhaustion, the desperation, the way the older one was trying to keep the other's spirits up, made him hesitate. Children reached his front gate as the last light faded from the sky. They were a ragged bunch, dressed in clothes that had seen better days, their faces dirty from travel and pinched with hunger. The oldest was a girl of maybe 14, with auburn hair falling loose from a braid and green eyes that held more determination than Mac had seen in grown men. She was carrying a little one who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Behind her came what looked like twin boys around 12, both blond and blue-eyed, flanking a younger boy who seemed withdrawn and fearful. The last child was a girl of perhaps 8, with brown curls and a face that would have been pretty if it weren't so thin and worried. "Mister?" The oldest girl called out, her voice steady despite what had to be bone-deep exhaustion. "We don't mean any trouble. We were wondering, could we maybe sleep in your barn tonight? We'll move on first thing in the morning. I promise." Mac studied them from his porch, the revolver still heavy in his hand. They were runaways, that much was obvious. Probably from one of the orphanages in Denver or Colorado Springs. Part of him wanted to tell them to move along, that he had problems enough without adding 6 homeless children to the list. But the little one the girl was carrying, she was crying softly, and the sound hit Mac like a physical blow. It reminded him too much of Sarah during those final terrible days when the fever was winning and nothing he did could comfort her. "You're trespassing," Mac said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "Yes, sir, I know," the girl replied. "But it's going to be cold tonight, and we don't have anywhere else to go. We won't take anything, won't cause any trouble. Just somewhere warm to sleep." One of the twin boys stepped forward. "We can work for our keep, mister. We're strong, and we know how to do lots of things." "Speak for yourself, Jake," the other twin muttered. "I told you this was a bad idea." "Shut up, Jesse," Jake shot back. "We agreed to stick together. Children." The oldest girl's voice carried an authority that seemed far beyond her years. "We discussed this. We ask politely. We accept whatever answer we get, and we stay together no matter what." Mac found himself studying the girl with growing interest. She was clearly the leader of this little group, and she was handling the responsibility with a maturity that impressed him despite himself. There was something about the way she held herself, the way she kept track of all the other children while still managing to look him directly in the eye, that reminded him of Catherine Dot the Little. One in her arms stirred and looked up at Mac with enormous brown eyes. "I'm hungry," she said in a small voice that cut straight through his defenses. "Rose, we'll find something to eat tomorrow," the older girl said gently. "Remember what I told you about being brave?" "I'm trying to be brave, Emma," Rose replied. "But my tummy hurts." Emma. The name hit Mac like a punch to the gut. It had been Catherine's middle name, Catherine Emma Sullivan. She'd planned to name their daughter Sarah Emma if they'd ever had more children. "Please, mister," the withdrawn boy spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. "We won't bother you. We just need somewhere safe." Mac looked at the 6 young faces staring up at him hopefully, desperately. They were somebody's children, maybe dead parents, maybe parents who couldn't care for them, maybe parents who simply didn't want them. But here they were, trying to take care of each other with nothing but determination, and whatever love they could share among themselves. He thought about the bullet waiting in his gun, about the peace he'd been seeking just minutes ago. But he also thought about Catherine, about what she would have said if she could see him turning away children who needed help. "Barn's around back," Mac said finally, his voice gruff with emotions he didn't want to examine too closely. "There's hay for bedding and water from the pump. But I want you gone first thing in the morning, understand?" Emma's face lit up with relief, so profound it was almost painful to watch. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Will be no trouble at all. There's some bread and milk in the kitchen," Mac found himself saying before he could stop the words. "I'll bring it out. That's very kind, but you don't need to. I said I'll bring it out." Mac's tone brooked no argument. "Get yourselves settled." As the children made their way toward the barn, Mac heard Emma organizing them with quiet efficiency. "Jake, you and Jesse see about making beds in the hay. Molly, help me get Rose cleaned up. Tommy, you just rest. I know you're tired." Mac went inside and gathered what food he had. Not much, but enough to put something in 6 small stomachs. As he loaded bread, milk, and some leftover stew into a basket, he caught sight of his reflection in the kitchen window. The man looking back at him was hollow-eyed and gaunt, aged beyond his years by grief and whiskey. What was he doing? In a few hours, he'd been planning to end his suffering once and for all. Now he was feeding stray children, like some kind of good Samaritan. It didn't make sense, But as he carried the food out to the barn, he heard something he hadn't heard in 3 years, the sound of children's laughter. It was quiet, probably not wanting to disturb him, but it was there, real and warm and alive inside. The barn, the children had arranged themselves in a circle on a bed of hay, sharing what little they had and trying to keep each other's spirits up. Emma was braiding little Rose's hair while the twins whispered together and planned something. That involved a lot of hand gestures. Molly was trying to coax a smile out of Tommy, who still seemed lost in whatever private sorrow he carried. "Here," Mac said, setting the basket down in the center of their circle. "It's not much, but it should help." "Oh my," Emma breathed, looking at the food as if it were a feast. "This is wonderful. Thank you so much." Mac watched as she divided everything carefully, making sure each child got an equal share, even though she was clearly the hungriest of all of them. She gave little Rose the first cup of milk, helped Tommy with his bread, and only took her own portion after everyone else had been served. "Where are you children from?" Mac asked, settling onto a bale of hay despite his intention to just drop off the food and leave. "Denver," Emma said carefully. "We were at the St. Mary's Home for Children." "Were?" Emma's jaw tightened. "It wasn't a good place, mister. The people who ran it, they weren't kind. And they were going to split us up, send us to different places. We couldn't let that happen." Jake nodded emphatically. "We're family. Real family, even if we don't all have the same blood. Nobody's going to separate us." "How long have you been traveling?" 4 days, Jesse answered. "We've been sleeping rough, trying to find somewhere safe." Emma thought maybe if we got far enough from the city, we could find work, find someone who'd let us stay together. Mac studied their faces in the lamplight. They were exhausted, underfed, and probably scared out of their minds. But there was something unbreakable in the way they looked at each other, in the way they instinctively moved to protect and comfort one another. "What happened to your families?" he asked gently. "Different things," Emma said softly. "My parents died of cholera when I was 10. Jake and Jesse's father was killed in a mining accident, and their mother died having another baby. Molly's folks died in a fire. Tommy ... She looked at the quiet boy with infinite gentleness. "Tommy's parents were murdered by road agents 2 months ago. He was hiding in the root cellar and saw the whole thing. He hasn't talked much since." Tommy looked up at Mac with eyes that held too much knowledge for a child his age. Mac recognized that look. He'd seen it in mirrors for 3 years. And Rose? Rose was left at the orphanage when she was just a baby. Never knew her parents. But she's ours now. We're all each other has. Mac felt something twist in his chest. These children had lost everything, just as he had. But instead of giving up, instead of seeking an end to their pain, they'd chosen to fight for each other. They'd chosen hope over despair. "The orphanage will be looking for you," Mac said. "Yes, sir, probably. But we're not going back. We'll keep running if we have to. You can't run forever. You're children. You need adults to take care of you, to make sure you have food and shelter and schooling." Emma's chin lifted with stubborn pride. "I can take care of us. I've been doing it for months already. I can cook and clean and sew. Jake and Jesse are strong workers. Molly's good with little ones. We don't need much, just a chance." Mac looked around at the 6 young faces, all watching him with a mixture of hope and wariness. They'd trusted him enough to accept his help tonight, but they were ready to run again if he threatened their goal of staying together. "One night," Mac said finally. "That's what we agreed on. Come morning, you'll need to move on." "Yes, sir," Emma said quietly. "We understand." But as Mac made his way back to the house, leaving the children to settle in for the night, he found that the revolver in his hand felt heavier than before. The single bullet was still there, waiting, but something had changed in the space of An hour. For the first time in 3 years, Mac had been thinking about someone other than his own pain. And for reasons he couldn't explain, the sound of children's voices in his barn made the house feel less like a tomb and more like a home that had simply been waiting for life to return to it. Mac sat back down on his porch, the gun still in his hand but no longer pointed at his head. Tomorrow he would send the children on their way, and then he could return to his original plan. But tonight, for just this one night, he wasn't alone. And somehow, that made all the difference. I woke to the sound of chickens squawking and children's voices drifting from the direction of my coop. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. It had been so long since my ranch had heard anything but my own movements and the occasional lowing of cattle. Then the fog of sleep and last night's whiskey cleared, and I remembered the 6 children. In my barn, the promise they'd be gone by morning. But judging by the sounds outside, they weren't just awake. They were busy as if they'd always belonged here. I pulled on my boots and stepped out to see Emma collecting eggs with practiced hands. The twins, Jake and Jesse, were pumping water from the well and carrying it to the cattle. Little Molly was hanging laundered clothes on a makeshift line, and Tommy sat with Rose, braiding grass into figures, talking to her softly. Morning. Mister, Emma called when she saw me. We saw your chickens hadn't been tended, and your cattle looked thirsty. We wanted to help before we moved on. I watched them work, impressed by their quiet efficiency. They were thin but strong, and they knew their way around ranch work. You children eaten anything this morning? I asked. We saved some. Bread from last night, Emma replied. But I could see they were hungry, the kind of hungry that comes from days without enough food. I told them I'd made too many flapjacks for myself, which was a lie. I'd made just enough for one, as usual. But something about their gratitude made me want to extend my hospitality. Come inside when you're finished, I said. 20 minutes later, my kitchen was full for the first time in years. The children sat around my table, hands folded, waiting politely. As I served flapjacks and bacon, I really looked at each of them for the first time. Emma was clearly the mother figure, Jake outgoing and Jesse thoughtful, Molly gentle and wise, Tommy quiet but observant, and Rose was pure sunshine, chattering about grass dolls and the mountains. Where exactly are you children planning to go? I asked. West, Emma said. Maybe California or Oregon, somewhere with work and fewer questions. I thought about the journey ahead of them, the dangers, the cold. The law'll be looking for you, I said. They're going to separate us, Jake said. We're not going back. Their story broke my heart. The orphanage wanted to send them all to different places, break up their makeshift family. We decided to stay together, Emma said. Running was just the only way to do it. After breakfast, instead of leaving, Emma made me an offer. Mr. Sullivan, you're trying to manage this ranch alone. That's hard work. We're good workers, all of us. We could help you get things in shape, and in return, maybe you could let us stay until spring. Just until we can save up and make proper plans. I said I didn't need help, but Emma was right. My ranch was falling apart, and I'd been letting myself slide, too. I can't pay wages, I said. We don't need wages. Just food and shelter, and a chance to stay together. I looked out at my ranch, at the children, and something inside me shifted. All right, I said. You can stay. Over the E. Next week's, the ranch came alive again. Jake and Jesse took over the cattle, repaired fences, and brought in strays. Tommy fixed the porch steps and shutters, and started building real beds for everyone. Molly revived my vegetable garden, and Rose's laughter filled the house. Emma ran the kitchen, settled disputes, and somehow always knew what each of us needed. She became my closest confidant, sensing when my old grief threatened to overwhelm me. "You're remarkable with them," I told her one evening. "They're good children," she said. "They just needed someone to believe in them." I realized she was right somewhere along the way. I'd started believing in them. Then came the day when 3 lawmen rode up to the ranch. Emma quickly sent the children to the barn, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The marshal asked if I'd seen 6 runaway children. I told him they were here, but they were part of my family now, and I wanted to adopt them. "You can't just decide that," the marshal said. "There are procedures." I stood my ground. "They stay here. I'll go through proper channels. But they're not leaving unless you arrest me." Emma and the children came out, standing together. "We're fine here," Emma said. "We don't want to go back." The marshal saw how well they were cared for, and after a tense standoff, he agreed to let them stay while the legalities were sorted. That evening, as we gathered around the table, Rose asked, "Are we really going to get to stay?" "We're going to do everything we can to make that happen," I promised. "You're part of this family now." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Do you really want to adopt us? All of us?" I looked at the children who'd brought my ranch and my heart back to life. "Emma, you children saved my life. The least I can do is try to save yours in return." Winter came early and hard, but inside the ranch house, life flourished. The legal battle stretched on, but with each passing day, our bonds grew stronger. Teaching Jake and Jesse filled the empty spaces in my heart. Emma became my closest confidant. Molly's gentle nature reminded me there was still beauty in the world. Tommy's quiet strength helped rebuild my faith in the future. Rose called me Papa Mac and filled my days with laughter. In early March, the judge came with the marshal and a stack of papers. He'd investigated our situation and was impressed by how well the children were doing. "Adopting 6 children is unusual," he said, "but they're healthy, well-educated, and obviously loved. Do you understand the responsibilities?" I looked at my children. 5 months ago, I was a broken man. These children gave me back my life. They're the family I've been blessed to receive. The judge smiled. "Then, I grant your petition for adoption." The celebration that followed was something I'll never forget. Rose launched herself into my arms. Jake and Jesse whooped, Molly cried, and Tommy spoke more than he had in a month. Emma, with tears streaming, whispered, "Thank you for choosing us." "Thank you for saving me," I whispered back as spring turned to summer. I made plans for the ranch and for my children's futures. Emma would go to teacher's college. Jake and Jesse would stay on the ranch. Molly wanted to be a doctor, and Tommy an engineer. Rose would be whatever she wanted to be. The real test came when a couple from Denver wanted to adopt Rose. I refused. "She belongs here with us," Emma said, standing firm. That night, Rose asked, "Some ladies wanted to take me away today, didn't they? They thought they could give you a different life, but nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go." "I want to stay here forever," Rose said. "This is where my family is." "Then this is where you'll stay," I promised. Years passed. Emma became a teacher. Jake and Jesse ran the ranch. Molly became a doctor, Tommy an engineer, and Rose grew up strong and sure of her place in the world. On my 70th birthday, sitting on the porch with my grandchildren, Emma asked if I had any regrets. "Just one," I said. "That it took me so long to understand that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another." She smiled and leaned against me. "Thanks to 6 children who were brave enough to ask a broken-down old rancher if they could sleep in his barn. Thanks to a man who was brave enough to say yes." As the sun set behind the Rockies, I knew that family isn't about blood. It's about choice, commitment, and showing up for each other. The greatest miracles come disguised as the simplest requests. 6 children asking to sleep in a barn. A broken man choosing to say yes instead of goodbye. That made all the difference.